This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I believe we can start the session now. So agricultural transformation and technology and innovations hold a key to poverty reduction in Africa and can act as a catalyst in boosting productivity and growth in the agriculture agribusiness sectors. Entrepreneurs in Africa are increasingly seeing opportunities in the agriculture sector and are developing solutions that enable farmers to increase yields and access to markets. We are seeing a shift in how the agriculture sector utilizes and implements innovative technology to improve product output in a sustainable manner and address the need of greater food security globally. Despite the agri-SME's high contribution to the economic development and growth within their countries, as well as job creation, they still face a significant constraint with respect to access to agricultural technology, information, financing, and markets. Sorry for the feedback. Can everybody else kindly mute their mics? Thank you. Thank you. Some of these constraints are with respect to access to affordable and simplified technology, information, financing, and markets. The smallholder farming subsector is constrained by inadequate private sector development, general market failures, and farming communities who have lack knowledge, whose knowledge and skills and assets are based on limited access to or inadequate training and capacity. It is with this respect that the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership, AFAP, is collaborating with the Agribusiness Development Corporation for an exciting webinar series, which will focus on entrepreneurship, innovation, and education. These series of webinars are designed specifically for agri-SME entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs who wish to explore the exciting subsector agriculture sector. The objectives of these webinars are basically for us to be able to create a platform for knowledge sharing and experience exchange, as well as highlighting some of the success stories that are some of the agri-SME success stories, and also create a platform for promoting entrepreneurial mindsets as a job creation tool. We hope that these series would help create the platform for all of us to be able to grow the agriculture subsector on the African continent. Today's webinar will be looking at unlocking the potential of agri-SMEs in Africa and their role in the profitable agribusinesses. My name is Nana Aisha Mohammed, and I'll be the moderator for the day. Joining me, hello. Our panelists for the day will be our panel of experts will reveal to us their recipes for business success, share real life examples to help make better business decisions, and also highlight some of the key takeaways from their experiences over the year. These are seasoned gentlemen who have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience that they can bring to bear to support growing and upcoming SMEs within the agriculture sector. Our first panelist will be Dr. Joseph Mongangi, who is the head of financial services at the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership. His presentation will be looking at addressing SME financing to ensure food security in Africa. After his presentation, we'll be joined by Dr. Munir Halim, who is the managing director for Africom UK. His presentation will be looking at the importance of market analysis in improving business growth. Then after, the final presentation will be done by Dr. Jasti Range, who is the business development specialist at Freshmark Systems. His presentation will be looking at smallholder supply chains and how to make the food supply chain sustainable. With these webinars, we hope that we will be able to highlight some of these success stories that they have been able to transform within their subsectors. For our webinars, we welcome you. We welcome your suggestions on new topics for upcoming webinars, and we invite as many as possible agri-SMEs or agribusinesses that within the continent that would like to highlight and share their stories. For housekeeping, going into housekeeping, I'd like to share a few rules and some pointers. On the right hand of the platform, there is a chat box. Please use it to introduce yourself, your company, your email address, and then also indicate to us your expected outcome for today's webinar. We also invite your comments and questions. At the end of each presentation, there will be a 10-minute session or slot for us to be able to share our comments and questions. And at the end of all the three presentations, we'll also have an opportunity to have a much more deeper conversation, which would be about 30 to 40 minutes, where we'll welcome you, the participants, to share with us some of your experiences and also ask some of the questions that you'd like to ask. Today's webinar will be recorded. You'll receive a follow-up email within the next couple of days with a link to view the presentations and a recording of today's webinar. You're welcome to share the presentations with your colleagues and others. We hope that as much as possible, we would have this go out and reach as many people as possible. All our speakers will have their cameras on right now so that we can see who they are. So I'll invite the speakers to kindly turn on your cameras, please. Thank you. Great. Thank you. So I'd like to hand over.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So on that note, I would hand over to Dr. Joseph Mongangi, who would be our first presenter for the day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Naisha, and thank you for the promotion. I am an aspiring doctor, not yet, but I appreciate. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My presentation, let me try to share the screen so that we can be seeing the presentation. All right, let me get it in the presentation mode. Yeah. I am looking at the financial services pillar. There are three pillars that we will be looking that I mentioned, but focus on the financial services pillar, which is crucial for the development of agri SMEs as they play their role in the food security area in sub-Saharan Africa. The five key points that I would like to cover include: number one, the importance of agri SMEs, a quick highlight. The three key levers that are crucial that AVAP addresses or is involved in. The third area, which will be the focus of this presentation, is the AVAP trade credit guarantee model that we have implemented in several countries. The fourth area of focus is a highlight of the three models or the three key products that we are developing in the area of financial services for credit guarantee. And finally, I'll look at the 9-stage process and the critical risk points that AVAP looks at as we implement the trade credit guarantee programs. A quick highlight of what agri-SMEs are. These are SMEs that are closest to the farmer. They're driven by efficiency motives. While profit is a motive, the key drive is to provide a service, and they include agro-dealers. They can be truckers, they could be brokers, as they may be called in certain areas. They are processors, they are wholesalers, also street vendors, but they are involved in some way of running an agri business that is involved in the area of food security, food chain. They have often been referred to as missing middle, but recent studies have found that these are hidden middle enterprises that need to be recognized for their importance. Some of the key highlights that emphasize the importance include the following. A study by FAO Statistics in 2017 highlighted the fact that 80% of food consumed in African cities is actually moved by agri-SMEs. They have been considered missing or stagnant or backward or stuck in the middle, and sometimes seen as necessary nuisance. And in certain quarters, the government have tried to displace them with parasitos, and NGOs in some instances have tried to displace them with farmer-centered programs. But for sustainability purposes, agri-SMEs remain the hidden middle that I think that it is time to emphasize their role and the type of support that is needed for them to grow and do even better. Statistics show that in the last 25 years, this sector of agri-SMEs has grown by more than 800%. And this is reflected in the annual Agri status report of 2019. The reason for this growth is because they are important and they provide an essential service. There are three key levers that are necessary to be addressed when unlocking AGRISME potential. The three include agribusiness technical capacity enhancement, which can take several forms depending on the stage of development of the enterprise. There's the area of enabling business and policy environment, which again takes different forms at the government level, at the NGO public sector level, a sound policy environment for the private sector to grow and to be able to do their business in an environment that is enabling and that does not constrain. The third pillar is the access to credit and finance, and that is the focus of this presentation, which does emphasize the need to understand the financial needs of AGRISMEs in the environment where they are working, their capacity to manage credit, advance in form of finance or credit will not do much unless the AGRISMEs are able to manage that credit. There is the appropriateness of the credit and financial products that are available for this segment of agri-entrepreneurs. And finally, the collaborative financial institutions need to design appropriate credit or loan products that fit the type of business the agribusinesses are involved in. AVAP programs is actually designed to address these key levers that impact greatly on the development of agri-SMEs. I would like to focus on the third item, which is the AVAP trade credit guarantee model. There are three stages, which are actually a progression from incubation to the point where they can be they can stand on their own in the commercial operations with other parties. This is the first one, which is the incubation credit guarantee model, which is basically a three-party sort of partnership. We have AVAP serve as a facilitating agent, which manages a guarantee that guarantees a supplier who advances credit to the agri-SME. So it's circular in a way, and the role of AVAP is very much facilitational. But facilitational in the sense that AVAP has established a relationship with most fertilizer and seed enterprises in Africa, and that relationship is extended to the agri-SMEs that AVAP has supported in terms of strengthening their capacity, strengthening their risk, financial and inventory management capacities, and also the infrastructure. In one of the earlier programs, AVAP strengthened the agri-SMEs to be able to perform well in the area of logistics, their warehouses, the transportation, so that as they relate with the supplier, they have the capacity to be able to store and avail the product or the inventory that is involved. This model is very much relationship building. It is intended to strengthen the relationship between the supplier and the downstream agri-SME. Its justification and its sustainability depends on the fact that suppliers are interested in establishing or building their market, and they can build their market by utilizing these AGRISMEs as distributors. So if they have the capacity, they can move their product. Secondly, the new SMEs, once they start a relationship with the suppliers and their capacity is enhanced, the risk of loss or default is minimized. So it incentivizes suppliers to explore new markets through the AGRISMEs downstream. The next stage, which is more like a graduation from the earlier model, involves introducing a bank into the scheme. And by the way, the model that I've just covered, we are using it a lot in Tanzania. We have used it in Mozambique as well, and Ghana. The next stage, or partial credit guarantee through the bank or using a bank, is a model that we are applying in Nigeria, where because of the guarantee that is availed, the capacity building that's ongoing, a bank can have confidence in the AGRISME and avail credit, or rather avail credit to the AGRISME and pay the supplier upon the order being placed. So that introduces a commercial player who is important in the long-term sustainability of the arrangement. And the way it works would be such that AVA could provide a partial guarantee to the financial institution, and the financial institution will seek additional collateral to fulfill its risk minimization objectives. And once the account is operational, the supplier would be paid by the bank and avail the product to the AGRISME as it strengthens the commercial relationship between the three parties. And the role of AVA continues to be that of strengthening the AGRISME, building this relationship and confidence in other parties involved. And at the end of the day, when AVA moves out of the scene, we have the final graduated sort of arrangement, which is what we have in this slide, whereby AVA can move out of the scene, the bank continues to avail credit to the AGRISME, while the supplier is availing the products to the AGRISME. And that way, we have several such AGRISMEs in Tanzania who have graduated, and they are well into the bank. They have an overdraft account which pay or running account with the AGRISME, and Yara, who is one of the main a key player in the fertilizer supply in Tanzania, avail the product and the bank pays. So it's possible to have that relationship now continuing, taking its own life. So I decided to start from the end, that is, with the product. Now I would like to focus on how it works. How does AVA go about in establishing this relationship between the parties that are involved? And I would like to cover what we call the 9-stage process. These are 9 stages that AVA goes through in establishing and running a trade credit guarantee program in the countries where we are implementing such a program. The first step is scanning and understanding the value chain drivers, who are the key drivers in this particular sector. AVAP, as most of the listeners may know, is engaged and involved in the fertilizer value chain. So here we are talking about the leading fertilizer value chain drivers. These may be manufacturers, may be large importers, may be blenders who are at the top of the chain. A lot of them, we have worked with them. AVAP has worked with them at one stage or another in most of the African countries. Once we have identified these value chain drivers in the given country, we introduce a program and try to get a buy-in. We explore collaborative arrangements with identified key industry players that they would be willing to link into the AGRISMEs that AVAP works with in the different countries. And we go ahead to a binding engagement. These are credit guarantee agreements that has outlined how the arrangement will work between AVAP and the large value chain drivers. Then downstream, we identify, we already have a database of AGRISMEs that are involved in agriculture in the different countries. We link them into the arrangement with the large players. We carry out assessment of the potential buyers. We carry out a risk assessment. Some of them already have we've been involved in building their capacity, and those that can do successful business are linked into the upstream players in order to begin the relationship that we are talking about. The sixth stage involves what we call the agribusiness partnership contracts. These are contracts that stipulate some of the regulation, the stipulation that are necessary for the AGRISMEs to work with AVAP, the ethical practices, the fact that they are running a legitimate business, the fact that they are committed to fertilizer market development. This is a document which binds the two parties in the process. There's element of capacity building. We carry out assessment of what areas that may need capacity building and facilitate capacity building in key areas like risk management, like cash flow management, inventory management, to be sure that the business, when it's running, is running in a sustainable manner. AVAP has a strong monitoring unit which captures data and goes ahead to digitize that data for effective project management. And finally, project review to determine success or otherwise of the project. So those are the 9 stages that we religiously go through in the process of building the relationships along the value chain for the trade credit guarantee that we implement. I'd like to say a few things about some of the critical risk points which we are concerned about and that we look at very closely. These are decision notes which, if a wrong decision is taken, increase the probability of default and potential depreciation of the guarantee fund. The next slide basically emphasizes the type of value chain that we are looking at. We are looking at manufacturers, importers, then the agri-SME sector, the downstream agro-dealers or smaller SMEs down to the farmers. Trade credit risks increase as you move down the chain. Our focus is the area we are calling the agri-SME. Often we have used the term hub agro-dealers, especially for the fertilizer value chain. The 5 areas of risk that are important include the following. The first is selection of the SME players. If the selected AGRISME is not ethical, is not professional, or is not a solid business, risk of default is high. And that is the first one that is very important, that we ensure that we minimize risk by selecting, having a criteria that is solid in selecting the AGRISME players that we work with in the value chain. Then qualifying sell decisions. At the point of the buyers placing orders to the suppliers, it is very important that both the supplier and AVAB determine that that sale is a qualifying sale. It fits within the, there's a fit with the credit limit for the organization or the supplier that we're working with. The timing within the season is right, and SME has the capacity to handle that that order or the particular sale. We look very closely at the payment due dates, monitoring the invoices that are outstanding to be sure that the payments are made on the due date when they are supposed to be paid. And in the event of invoices being not paid on time, action is taken almost immediately. Delay in taking action in the event of initial default in the payment of invoice sets stage for possible default. So again, the monitoring system has to be to monitor closely that payment dates are honored, and that is very important, especially when building the confidence with other financial institutions, especially banks. With a supplier, there may be negotiation, but when it comes to banks, they're very particular in ensuring that the discipline that invoices are paid on time is observed. And then, of course, since we are running a trade credit guarantee, when default takes place, the claim process kicks in. And the fact that a claim kicks in doesn't mean that whoever is defaulting is let free. All the necessary measures to ensure that debts are paid are put in place and debt pursued, even when the guarantee amount has been guaranteed amount has been paid or reimbursed to the supplier. So the point here is that the system has to be to have all the checks and balance to ensure that it doesn't encourage default, because then the guarantee fund itself will be depreciated. And again, the objective of building confidence in the relationship between the parties is affected. Some of the risk assessment indicators that we look at when we are analyzing the critical risk points. For the buyer, we are looking at business management and technical capability, that they are qualified and they have the capacity to run the business efficiently and effectively. We look at the financial health of the organization, and we also look at the supporting regulatory environment to be sure that the buyers that we link to the main suppliers upstream are buyers that will sustain the business in the longer term. For the qualifying sale decision, we are looking at the viability of the sale volume. Is it too much for the AGRISME? Is it within? Has it handled? Does he have a history of handling that sale volume? All those are factors that come to play. Timing in the season, too late in the season or too early in the season has cash flow implications, which again we consider. Invoice due date, as I mentioned, again, does the organization have a credit control unit that will keep monitoring the invoices to be sure that the SMEs that have been advanced credit are monitored, are paying on time. Default declaration and bank notes, again, that has to be, there has to be a clear system that both the supplier as well as the buyers or qualified buyers understand and follow to the letter. Use of credit reference bureau in countries where that exists is a very useful sort of a tool as well in the process of managing default. And finally, the process of claims and post-claim follow-up, file accurate, reliable documentation that can stand the scrutiny of the court is very important in the whole process. The order, the invoice, the payments, receipts, and all have to be properly documented. The need for a professional debt collector. AVAP as an NGO will not be the best debt collector when it comes to litigation, but the initial follow-up is okay. But when it comes to the rough and tough follow-up through litigation, a third party is brought in. And I would like to end at that point. I will take questions, or you can write questions on the chat box, and I will respond to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph, for your in-depth presentation. So we now have 5 more minutes, 10 minutes for us to ask questions. I'll move to the chat function to see if there are any questions that have been posed to Joseph. Does anybody have any questions? So I'll just like to ask a few questions of my own, Joseph, if that's okay with you. In terms of mitigating, I think you've clearly outlined some of the risks involved in the implementation of the credit guarantee. So in experiences from AFAP's credit guarantee implementation, what has been some of the recovery rates for these credit guarantees? And if you look at also the risks that you have outlined, what are some of the clear outline or specific actions that you have taken to mitigate those risks in implementation?
Yeah, on the first question, actually the recovery rate, I will not call it recovery rate as such. This is a guarantee program we are running, and maybe the term would be default rate. When you look at the program that we implemented in 3 countries, in Tanzania, in Mozambique and Ghana, the default rate was minimal, and the reason here is that these agro dealers want to build that relationship. They want to earn the confidence of both the supplier as well as the bank. The default rate that we face in Tanzania and Ghana especially resulted from subsidy programs that had been advanced, in which the AGRISMEs, the hub dealers, participated, and the government delayed in payment, so that their cash flow got really messed, and they couldn't pay the supplier on time, and eventually AVAP had to make good some of the 50, or rather, let's say the portion that they had guaranteed. In terms of mitigation measures, it goes back to the credit risk points that I was mentioning. And I can give an immediate example of what we are doing in Tanzania, where if the credit immediately we see the invoices that are supposed to be paid within 60 days, and they begin to fall behind by 20 days, additional 20 days, additional 30 days to 90 days, we instructed the supplier to suspend any further credit to that organization or the AGRISME, in order to minimize any further or advancing good money after bad money. So agro-dealers, agro-dealers that we work with know that if they default, then they will not be qualifying for further credit from the suppliers that they are using, and that affects their business. You had a third question, Nana?
So the third question I was asking was that for anybody that will be looking at implementing a credit guarantee program of such magnitude, what are the key things that you would like for them to take away as pointers that they should be more succinct and follow through to be able to have a successful rate as AFAP has had with our credit guarantee?
Okay, the three elements that must be there, if I got it right. Number one is the guarantee funder, who is funding the guarantee. For example, currently we have a 4 million euro guarantee fund with AFFM, that is African Fertilizer Financing Mechanism of African Development Bank, and that is a key element without which the guarantee arrangement may not work. The second is existing strong relationship with the key value chain drivers. The suppliers have to have confidence in the organization that approaches them. When we began, for example, in Kenya in 2000, when we had a similar credit guarantee program in Kenya in 2007-8, one of the challenges we face is this guarantee is just paper, a piece of paper. Are you going to place money in our bank with our organization so that the guarantee, we have something that we can liquidate in case of default? But over time, as you have backup organization that is credible, with a trade guarantee agreement, and the reputation and name that you are an established legitimate organization with a relationship with these suppliers, they begin to have confidence in the program that you are proposing. And of course, the third is a network of being well networked into the with regard to the existing AGRISMEs that the organization can work with.
All right, thank you very much, Joseph. I see a question here from Neela Alam. She's asking that apart from all measures to ensure agri-SMEs on credit related issues like insurance, and still there are some marginal issues to these SMEs. What should be advised, especially in rural areas? So how would we be able to address some of these key issues, looking at the very last mile, where there is less finance available or less insurances that will be looking at such mega amounts of financing that is needed at that last mile level?
As I indicated in one of the slides, the further you go down the value chain, the higher the risk. The risks at the farmer level are much higher. What we have done in some of the marginal areas where we begin with supporting the agri-SMEs, which are much smaller enterprises, is to encourage them through probably matching grant facility that begins to build the business. And they say build the business, they gain confidence, they begin to grow, they continue to offer services to the lower levels of the value chain, the farmers. They begin to be recognized by the suppliers, and the suppliers would like to get entry into those new marginal areas as part of the expansion or as part of building the market. And we have seen that in Tanzania, for example, where in the Lake region, where we have supported a number of agro dealers and retail dealers, seeing larger companies coming in to work with those new agro dealers as they begin to build the networks on the ground, which become interesting market for companies that are looking to expand their markets. But it's a broader area which because of the risks involved and development support or public type support comes in to mitigate or reduce the risks involved.
All right, thank you very much. So he's asking, so I've got a question from Navi, who is asking if, just to know if an initiative of credit guarantee is applied countrywide or just for specific targeted areas, and in which countries in particular are we implementing these credit guarantees. I'm sure maybe, Joseph, you'll be able to answer that in the chat box directly with Navi as we move to the next presenter. So just to also share, all the presentations and the recording would be shared with everybody in the next newsletter or available online for everybody's access. So as the next presenter would be Dr. Munir Halim, Managing Director for Africom UK. He's going to be making a presentation on the importance of market analysis in improving business growth. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Munir.
Okay. Now I can. Well, thank you, Nana, for the introduction, and thanks to the whole AFAP family for giving me a chance to speak today to the attendees and explain a little bit of what we do and how we are determined in playing a role in the Africa Green Revolution, and the side that we're playing on is the market information, market analysis, market information. So I'll try and share with you my presentation, and it is this one. Share. Okay. Right. Excellent. I'm going to. Is that okay? I assume that's looking good, and it's shared. Excellent. So yes, thank you, IFAB. So as I said, my name is Munir Halim, and today I'll be talking about market analysis, market intelligence, and how it should be playing a role in improving business growth. And this is the key word that was on purpose missing from that title, because there is a long way to go in improving business growth, and there are many, let's say, hurdles that are blocking that potential growth that we expect from different markets in Africa. Yeah, today, so I'll be sharing a little bit of what we do, how we are helping it, and it's unfortunately also on how the supply chain is somewhat unbalanced. You will see what I mean in the next few slides. So briefly, this is who we are. So we're based in London, Dubai, and Casablanca, and we are focusing. Well, our business is in market intelligence, but we are providing different tools for that. The key one and the core one is what you could see here on the left is the market reports, and that's weekly market information on everything fertilizer to do with Africa. That's the starting point. Then we move on to another major tool for market information, and this is the analytics service that we are developing together with our partners AFAP. Which will also shine light on all markets and all their infrastructure, demand, movement, requirements, crops, and greater detail. Other elements we have is the data board, which is this is I can easily say a revolutionary tool in the whole of the fertilizer market intelligence business, and it's starting first in Africa, and we are really proud, and we're also doing it now together with AFAP for this first market analytics report that is going to come out. So it's going to be powered by these data boards. And later on, it will also be applied to these weekly reports. What are these data boards? It's just you log in of any, depending on levels of agri-SMEs or a major global producer. So we will have different data boards for each level or of interest or supply chain. And so you log in and you have all information that you need, particularly prices, stock levels, movement of market trend. So let's say an agri-SME that is importing in Tanzania or Nigeria, as we've seen in the previous presentation, even before they get to the level of going and buying or even negotiation, they will know how the market is doing globally, how the supply demand, are there more products out in the market, or is there shortage, which another thing we will be talking about, and an example of how agri-SMEs could have avoided that if this service was available to them, or if they were taking the market information that we provide. And last but not least, so we put all this together, and we're trying to get the market in a new and a different sort of conference series, where we are partnering with some very key actors in the industry, to name AFA, the Arab Fertilizer Association and AFA. More on this later on, but the key product here that, and this is where I'm going to go back to my point of the unbalanced and unfair, if you like, situation in the supply chain. What do I mean by that? So this is, so African came in 2018 and created a revolutionary sort of report that nobody thought existed, and then many thought it would be difficult to do, and the very few that maybe believed in it, they thought that is not going to be of interest to a lot of people. So we've defied everybody, so went and did it, and it's now the leading report that is published every week in the industry. So we publish it every week, and it's got, and I'll show you an example. This is of a recent one. It was for maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. And I'll show you the structure and what the clients, our clients, are getting. And this is where, before I get into the report, is the imbalanced and unfair situation I see that is happening. What do I mean by that? Well, simply, who are our clients? Apart from some agri-SMEs and some governments and some NGOs, if you put all these little groups together, so I put the agri-SMEs within this, they are representing probably about maybe 10% of our clients, whereas the vast majority is the global producers that are selling fertilizers into the agri-SMEs, and traders that are also buying in the supply chain from producers and selling to agri-SMEs. So now you have this unbalanced situation where the people that are selling they know every single thing that is happening, and this is the greed. That's why I called it revolutionary. This is every information that is happening. We do our best to pick it up and publish it in terms of alerts, notification that are instant, and then the weekly report comes in with additional information, additional analysis. So all these guys are aware of everything that's happening, and they're aware of shortages in the CAN that we've been going on and talking about everybody in Eastern Africa. So, for example, Kenya and Tanzania had a huge or serious shortage in CAN and urea. They've been heavily importing DAP and PKs, and that's a different story. But suddenly they found themselves in a big shortage. They went out to the market that was already soaring prices globally because of freight, because of short supply. So the trend of nitrogen, particularly in this case, because we're talking about CAN and urea, jumped. I mean, prices moved 60–70% up. So I'll tell you an example. The last sort of offers that were of CAN in East Africa, they were around 200, 210, then started to move to 220. The recent offers, and this is in the space of about a month and a half, 2 months, is 350 CFR. I mean, going from 220 to 350 is incredible. And some buyers, if they are desperate and need to get that CAN, they will buy it. They will not buy all the tonnage that they need, but they will buy some of the elements. I mean, this is $150 higher than they could have bought if they were clients and they knew what we are talking about. And this is in general, or a simple example of the Kenyan and Tanzanian market, how they've suffered this move. And as you can see in the first page here, the bottom graphs in the middle, you can see the nitrogen prices. They're not very clear, but it's just to give you an idea. This is Eastern, Western, and South Africa prices for urea. And you can see what I'm talking about. Towards the beginning of the year, the prices just took completely different direction, and with high speed and very, very sharp sort of angle to increase. Now, I will give you even more disastrous, if I might say, examples of the lack of knowledge or the lack of reactivity, all combined together, that are affecting markets. And in this case, we'll be talking about cases in Western Africa, where not having the knowledge and not having the information, and perhaps sometimes not even being aware of such tools exist, are causing huge market destruction. So if we go briefly back to show you guys and just explain to you what this report is like. So in the first page, and I'll go back to it with this video, you get all prices of fertilizer prices, all fertilizer prices to the ports in Africa, the key ports. Okay, so this keeps going back. And so that's going to be urea, DAP, ammonium sulfate, CAN, ammonium nitrate, DAP, NPK, TSP, and so on. Now, and then we can start going into next pages. Then this is global markets. So the agri-SMEs will have the information they need about where the direction are going, so they decide what to do. Then, of course, this is one Africa. So we cover Northern Africa in greater detail. This is not perhaps the relevant here. Then we can go to the sections that are of interest, Western Africa, and I'll keep going quickly, but you can see there are analysis, details, prices, demand, volume, exports, imports, inland prices in Nigeria, in Kenya, and we add in different parts of Africa. So it is, and this is what I meant by a unfair, and it's just, how can these guys, yes, of course, these agri-SMEs, and not all of them, but the larger of them, they have their own contacts, and some of them are already subscribers. There are so many others that are either buying from these bigger ones or themselves buying, but they have just one or two contacts, a trader, and they're calling this trader, and they're giving them this information. Now, that doesn't mean the trader is not giving them right information. For sure they are. However, this is from one or two people, whereas and it's from a guy that is trying to sell, whereas what we come in as a neutral information that we're talking to everyone and bring in the market transparency. And this is, you will see what I mean, why this is important in the growth of the African agriculture. So, and that's why today I'm briefly going through our Africa Expert Iceberg sort of model to try and explain how this transparency to get into market information, intelligence, and analytics that will help these SMEs. We're going to show the impact of the public sector. We've seen that in a greater degree in West Africa. Then I'm going to give some really concrete examples of what we've been telling people in the report. Like I said, the other side of supply chain can see all that, read it all, see an alert from us, but the other side didn't get any of that, and you will see what the result is. And that's a pure example of how these the unfortunate impact of lack of market intelligence to the agri-SMEs. So this is the African iceberg. I mean, surprising because we do not have icebergs in Africa, but we do have them in the fertilizer business. That's why I made sure that the water here is not blue. It's more of a gray, opaque, that we cannot see what's going on, but the concept remains the same. And what is that? So the concept of African iceberg is of all these guys, including AFAP, including AFRICOM, including big producers, NGOs, aid donors, governments, the whole ecosystem. They are looking at all the different problems that exist in order to progress and go ahead with the green Africa Green Revolution, if you like, vessel. But there is this huge iceberg. So what we tend to do, try to look at freight costs, farmer access, training, infrastructure, the things that are either visible and easy to target, or not necessarily easy to solve, but some of them might be. Also, that are the one that are, like I said, more visible. However, even if you go at those things, there are so many other elements in the darker side of the iceberg, or the invisible side of the iceberg. And that's not necessarily invisible. It could be also not willing to touch it because of some taboos, or we don't want to talk about some agri-SMEs that are themselves being blocking the development of Africa because they're just looking for profits, not for growth. And that's not necessarily just for SMEs, that's also the bigger agri-importers. So there are things maybe that we'll either try to avoid talking about them or not, but all these are problems. And fair enough, one might think, well, we clear the top and then we'll try and address one after one. But that's where another problem or a challenge is, because all of these things are intertwined and interconnected problems. So you cannot just come and say, farmers access, I'm going to solve farmers access and I'm going to make sure they have fertilizer all the time. It doesn't mean you've solved the problem. And that's it. And then everything will be utilizing 2 to 3 times the fertilizer, producing more yield, and suddenly we see explosive growth and a green revolution in the continent. Certainly not. These things are related, because if that product is for the farmers available all through the year, let's say somebody came in and they've got warehouses and we solve this problem, is it selling? Well, now we go back to CFR prices and these CFR prices and when this product came in. So did it come at the right time, the wrong time? When the price, you saw the curve when I showed you the price going up, did it come at the top of the curve, at the bottom of the curve? So that even if the product is there available to the farmer, maybe he's not going to be able to pay for it. So that's another angle of farmers access. And also that price, when the farmer gets to it, it's also dependent of other things like infrastructures. I put it a little bit visible here because governments try to solve infrastructures, not just for the agri sector and fertilizer, but the whole of the economy. So this is just sort of examples, and I'll give you the best one of all of these that I keep repeating every time somebody talks to me about training farmers. No, we need to train them. We're training farmers. We're really good. These farmers in this village now they understand which NPKs to use because they are farming this crop or that crop or this crop. Yeah, that's fantastic. How many times are you going to keep talking to these guys? Do you think they will always be using, let's say, 1515 NPK or 1418 because they're using cotton? Well, it depends how did you train it, and is it just once and then it disappeared? Because the next time the agro dealer maybe has a different NPK and he wants to sell it. He says, well, it's NPK, take it. And if there is no other product, the farmer will take it, and therefore that training is gone. So it's not just about training. It's not just about farmers access. It's about a whole iceberg with interconnected nodes that needs to be addressed. So when you go, and then of course each country, and then within the country each region, and then within the region each sort of farmer group or crop, there are you can select a few interconnected nodes, which means then at least you can simplify this iceberg to a little bit of areas that you can clear and solve, but simultaneously. You cannot just say, well, we're going to try and bring, and this is a good example, and I think this is marvelous what the African Development Bank is doing, and then AFAP is executing them in Tanzania and Nigeria, and that for sure is going to give us growth. But is it the growth that Africa deserves? Is it growth that the African farmers deserve? I don't think so. On its own, at least, it will not deliver it, and that's why few of the ecosystem and players are trying to connect some of these elements to help improve, and I think AFAP is doing a very great job at that. So now you get at least the picture. I mean, you can see here transparency. So I'm putting transparency here, and that was the first time we brought the iceberg. But this transparency has moved up, and now you remember I just told you it depends which country you are. This iceberg can look different. So the transparency, this is more like for the African importers, AGRISME, agro dealers. It is really, it's not transparent. They don't know. They probably know about 10-15% of what's the market. They know it when they go and want to buy, and they ask their contacts, and then they know the prices. So it's very limited sort of transparency and information. Whereas for the other side of the chain, as I mentioned earlier, of the ecosystem is here, because now every single producer that sells into Africa gets Africom's tools and knows what's going on, when is the best time, who's the best buyer, what is the right product to go to, and so on. Now, very briefly, I'll go through the public sector impact, and that's another thing that is extremely interesting, sensitive, but also of a huge potential at the same time. Why? Because in West Africa particularly, and you can see in this example, we have a lot of Western African countries. I mean, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Benin, Ghana. And we're talking here about the presidential election. And there is a reason why we're mentioning it, of direct link of presidential election to agri programs. And what says agri program says imports and fertilizer markets. I give you the example here of Malawi. It's exploded just before all following the presidential pledge, which is fantastic. The question here is this sustainable? And that's the danger. That's the problem. This is fantastic if our government comes up with a very good idea, and we saw it in Togo, and we saw it last year in Togo, where a market of 45,000 ton went into 155,000 ton, which was incredible, really incredible. That's 3 times the size of a market. And this year, and that could have been a sort of presidential pledge, and it's happened, but what happened the next year? But actually this year, they're still going ahead with a big number, maybe not as high as 150, because that might have been quite ambitious, but still a very, very strong number. So briefly, what I'm going to mention about these things, the presidential elections, pledges and so on impact these things. And the example I'm going to mention is Ghana one. And you will see it in my next page. Ghana, out of the very, very, very few countries in West Africa that showed huge increase in 2020 demand for 2021 deliveries. So that means the projection for 2021 market was 30% higher than what they did in 2020. I mean, that's fantastic, because all the other countries is minus 11%, minus 30%. So all of most of other countries, even the well-performed Benin, was on the negative side. Ghana was the most beautiful story. It shows huge growth, 30%. Great, we're going there. We're providing the country, the ecosystem of the blenders. Everything's happening. It's working. We see growth. Since I'm talking to Ghana, I'll jump into the Ghana example. And as you can see here, this is the demand from one buyer in Ghana, and it's the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and it's the major buyer. And I think because it's heavily subsidized, the business in the fertilizer business in Ghana. But that's fine. That's a different story about subsidies and so on. 500,000. That what the market in 2020 wanted. That means it's the demand for 2021. So this is tender in a nutshell. Tender comes out. It came out actually towards the beginning of the second half. That's 6 months ago. Or no, sorry. By now it's like about 10 months ago, and it's requiring 500,000 ton for 2021 season. Well, we are in April, and out of this 500,000 ton, only up to 100. I'm being extremely generous here because we've only tracked about 70, and we're accommodating of other vessels and containers and so on that would go there. So that's not even the fifth of the demand of the market, with the window closing, because at some point that's it. You cannot have that product anymore because you cannot apply it to your crop anymore. It's too late, or you are also limited in terms of buying, because some suppliers cannot give you that product anymore, either because of the season, they're going somewhere else with that product, or where they are going to that they cannot produce that product at that time for many different reasons. So, I mean, this is a very sad story. And why is that? Well, what happened is the market went up. The curve I showed you for the prices. These guys that were awarded the 500,000 ton were awarded this back in November, just before or after my memory fails me here, but just before or after the elections, they were awarded this 500,000 ton at the prices they bid at. So, but you saw where November price it was, and you saw where January, February, and March, April is. So these guys have been waiting for the price to correct, because they cannot lose millions of dollars. And at the same time, they have not been paid from the last season campaign. So they're like, well, we're not paid, but we're going to be paid eventually. But then are we going to buy this at this price and then lose more money? So created a nightmare. But all this was visible to all of us and to all the importers. And that's why some of them did actually see that it's impossible that the market is not going to buy. And they did start to get some cargoes, but they could not take the whole risk of buying the whole 500,000 ton. But what's happening in Ghana, from the MOFA perspective, the ministry, even the Ministry of Finance, the government as a whole, the local players, if they knew what this was happening, they would not put themselves in that position, and they would have acted a long time ago. This is the most simplified picture. Whoever is interested, there are even more debatable items on this, but the result is that lack of information is one of the major reasons causing this. And what I mean lack of information is because of the prices. When things move, you'll be aware of it before it moves, rather than when you see it already starting, then it's already too late. Mali, again, I mean, this is disastrous, because Ghana is still chances of more vessels coming in, but in Mali, and I've taken the biggest buy here in Mali, one cotton producer buys 300,000 ton in 2020. They bought them at 300 2020. Well, in 2021, they were only going to buy 90,000 ton, and that's because of different problems to do with the political unrest that was in Mali and so on. But there is a huge reason and impact because of this transparency. Because even these guys, when they go and buy product, and it took time for this buyer to decide on the tonnage, and that was based on the prices. But when was this? That was in March, which means it's already way too expensive. And those prices, that 90,000 tons, so if you avoid and you exclude any impact of any country, political unrest and so on, stability, this 90,000 ton could have been at least easily 200,000 ton if this was acted 3 months ago, and they were informed and they know and they can see forward. Because this market is not like when we end up, and I'll go and show you the graph in my this page. When you end up in a market like this, when this is DAP, when we are in a market that, and this is Morocco's FOB DAP price, when we are in November, December, and it's selling around $350 per ton FOB, and then the market starts to accelerate, that every week is gaining $10, $20, $30 to reach $550 by February, the African markets do not understand it. Well, certainly in Western Africa, because of this complicated nature of tenders and so on. But typically in general, the bigger difference here is that when this agri-SMEs and even the bigger ones ask to buy and import fertilizer, they get an offer from a trader or from a producer, but they go and wait, and then suddenly this offer is huge compared to what they were expecting. So that's even impacted them even more in terms of the time it will take for them to buy the fertilizer. What happened since? The prices have increased by another $50. So when they come back and even they found ways of buying it, they found that they're out of market, particularly when they find themselves competing for spot tonnage. And the reason for this increase is also that there was not enough supply in the market, and it's a simple supply and demand sort of equation. So when they come back and trying to buy, who are they competing with? They're competing with the Brazilians, where the Europeans, where the Americans, just to name a few. And what is key feature of these guys? Now, these farmers, and therefore going back onto the supply chain, these farmers, they can sell forward their fertilizer, right? Their crops. So before even he applies and he starts his season, he has already, he knows how much he's going to sell his crop for. So when he gets the fertilizer increased by 50% or by 30 or whatever within this curve, and he knows I need the fertilizer now because I need to apply it now. I cannot wait and wait, because sometimes you can do that. But when we cannot wait, you can do a very simple maths, and you say, yeah, that's fine, that can still make money, and they buy. So in these times, producers or traders that are offering these products, when it's racing up the curve of prices, normally the validity is like 2 hours, you know, at best, and therefore these Brazilian and American or European can buy immediately, and then that puts more pressure on the spot availability, which means when the African importers come back to the market, they find themselves outbid and outtaken in terms of tonnage, and it's disaster. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. And even when it happens at a smaller rates, like when you see in these levels between January and February, yeah, it's not major. There are always solutions around it, but still the impact for the African farmer. So this information that we're talking about to the agri-SMEs will only lead if they behave according to market information they get and market intelligence, and they buy the best time and so on, and buy the best product and all that what we love and solve in that from that iceberg. The end result, and again, don't forget, I mentioned the iceberg to avoid that profit and so on. The African farmer will gain from fertilizer prices. So instead of buying here, they will buy here, and that makes huge difference, let alone when we are here. And this is an example, again, briefly, you saw the example but of Mali, of Ghana and Mali, but this one is showing you exactly what happened, because the tender came out in November, took them 2 months, over 2 months, to actually award the companies that were bidding. I mean, how can you do that when the market is accelerating in price? You might have, that was your process, which is another story, and it's absolutely the wrong way of doing things. But when you do it and it's your process and you see things, you know you're going to be burnt in terms of prices. So you should stop it as soon as possible. And if you are talking to us, a client of us, involved in our tools, you know, and you contribute to our tools, you will know exactly what to do. And we would have told you very quickly, because what we've been talking about, this increase, was happening before it happened. And then, of course, they did the award. And what was the result? That the person, whoever they bid, did not perform. So note that was at $85 per ton higher, a ton higher. And in this case, they were buying 15,000 ton. And you do your calculation, so that's millions of dollars of money extra that the government will have to find, which means out of the Mauritanian budget. So typically what happened, the awarded guy, even at this price, could not perform because he was already lost in this curve. And then they had to retender again, and then prices keeps increasing by $181 a ton since its first chance of buying. So you multiply $180 times 15,000 tons, and particularly in DIV it was 8,000 tons, but the same story happens for urea, and you can see it's millions and millions and millions of dollars gone from the budget, which is the first sort of impact, and two, the farmers, the prices are going to get them at. And it's pure disaster because information is there, market intelligence is there, and it's not being used by these governments, by these buyers, by these companies, by these agri-SMEs. And that's the major problem. So that's, well, one of the major tool is the weekly report I mentioned to you, and I did also mention that we joined forces, AFRICOM and AFAP, to provide another service, even with greater transparency, information, detail for even these maybe medium SMEs or these medium companies in Africa. Certainly, this will benefit the larger international companies, but certainly it would have an angle to these guys that when they come in, they need information. And again, remember, we say information is power. Well, actually not. Information is not power. Information is power only if you use it and if you know how to use it. And this is where all these tools that we are trying to come from AFRICOM and with strong partnership like with AFAP to try and help the ecosystem. For this particular product, so for the weekly, which is everything that is happening day to day in African fertilizer trades, you can contact us on this email. For the analytics service of AFRICOM and AFAP, you can contact either AFRICOM or AFAP on these details. And finally, don't forget to get your a copy of your digital map. Again, another tool of showing information, sharing information. This is, of course, the opportunity to thank AFAP amongst our sponsors and the partnership with Astrategia that made it happen. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munir, for an excellent presentation. One of the key points that I took out of your presentation was when you made that session that information is only power if you use it or know how to use it. Sometimes we tend to burden people with quite a lot of information to a point where they don't even know what to do with that information. And if we have information well packaged, succinct enough for people to be able to make business decisions and decisions that impact their businesses, that is only when we will see information being used for growth. And I'd like to go back to this to the chat box to see if there are any questions for Dr. Munir. Does anybody have any question? All right. So just to ask a brief question, in terms of accessing, how would SMEs or agri-SMEs be able to utilize your tools and be able to make certain business decisions beyond just
koso mahusika ukipata D ndo, yani sijaelewa bado mimi kama.
Okay, so I think we've sorted out the other microphones. No, a very interesting question, Nana. I think there are two answers to that. One, agri-SMEs can be of different sizes. So these agri-SMEs are, so it just depends on the size. Okay, so some of them can use the weekly market information. By having the weekly, which is subscribing to this AFRICOM service, not only you get this information, but also you get, and some of them already we get in Senegal, in Mali, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, and Kenya. They're already calling us every time when they're still not used to that system of following throughout the year, but when they approach, they start to talk to us, and we've got our team that speak to them and explain when, how, what the situation. A very good example in Kenya. Some of these guys changed their purchasing sort of system based on our advice, and we helped them a lot of what's the right time based on the movement of the commodity volatility prices. The other ones we are developing, which is on the smaller side. We are developing also another subscription model, but in any case, it's a subscription model. It's a subscription to AFRICOM's market intelligence tools, and they will have everything they know that they need to know to make the right decision.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for answering the questions. I think there's a question from Navi. So he's asking if the market and market analytic products or services information are procured through a one-off payment, or is it going to be through subscription? And what are some of the annual rates?
Yeah, it's an annual subscription. So it's an annual subscription, one payment, and if Of course, we do different packages depending on the company, depending on its status of if it's just starting, if it's already existing, depending on its size, depending on its revenue. We give different level of rates.
Okay, thank you. So Navi, I think it would be best if you contact Dr. Munir and AFRICOM or AFAB directly to make further inquiry to be able to get your quotation for your the subscription. Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'd like to move to the next presenter, Dr. Dusty. He would be making a presentation on smallholder supply chains and how to make the food chain more sustainable. So Dr. Dusty Range, over to you. Hello, Dr. Dusty.
Good day, colleagues. Can you all see me?
Yes, we can. I think you just need to switch to your presentation mode on your slide, and then we can move on. Thank you.
Good. Okay, just confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yes, I can see the presentation from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues, and thank you for AFAB for the opportunity to speak to you today. Firstly, I would like to just from my side introduce Freshmark Systems and my role there. So at Freshmark Systems, I do the business development. I've got a long history in the fresh produce sector in South Africa. I've been in it for a better part of my life. Freshmark Systems is the main solution provider to the national fresh produce markets, and I'll be referring to that throughout the presentation about the journey that we've had in South Africa surrounding solving this specific problem many years ago. But with the system also comes a lot of IP. If you're in the business for the better part of your life, you obviously understand the industry from different angles, and that's what I would like to share with you today. And just to frame the discussion. So firstly, when I'll be referring to value chains today, it will be definitely not about fertilizer. Right? So I'm specifically talking about the market side, the offtake side of how to create markets for the product that is delivered as part of the production, the primary production exercise. So important to note that it's about creating diversified offtake, and then ultimately how does one do that? The takebacks that I would like to leave with you today, and the contribution I think to this discussion, is to put the lens on the demand side, and then specifically how do you create those offtake environments, and how do you align that with the production of product, and that could be any product. Obviously there's a big bias towards the fresh side of production, but it also includes your other agricultural commodities. So what I'm going to share with you today is relevant across the spectrum. I would like you to, after today's presentation, look different at the problems we have in the value chains, and how do we unblock and achieve a return on the investment that's being made by all these sector players. I think secondly, I'd like to thank Dr. Halim for his analogy of an iceberg. I would like you to revisit that picture, because that's typically the picture that we face want to create active and vibrant value chains. So what informs today's discussion is we've obviously been in the market development space, in the creation of markets, and by that I mean physical markets. What needs to be happen when you want to create a big facility that does 100 or 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 tons annually. That type of big warehousing environment. How do you structure that? How does the business model look, etc.? But all the way down to small aggregation points. Our clients are people from the big municipal markets all the way down to small businesses with one or two operators. Then also the experience in Africa with the live projects in Zambia that we've got, Lesotho, Eswatini, and here in the Eastern Cape, specifically around the East London area, where we are busy with the revitalization of the big municipal fresh produce market in East London. So it's informed by a lot of work from the trenches, if you like. Right. So the research question that I want to frame the discussion around is, how do we do development agriculture, and how do we introduce that into formal value chains, ensuring sustainability and scalability? And that this research question has been formulated over many years from our experience. So the words here are chosen very carefully to illustrate the experience that we've had, that I've had personally, working in this sector, dealing with small-scale growers on a day-to-day basis, seeing where the blockages are, seeing where the breakages are, and understanding on a very deep level what these challenges are. As just a little bit of background, as I said, South Africa is renowned for its municipal markets, its network of municipal markets. It didn't happen by chance; it was created, and it took many years ago the fragmented supplier base and consolidated the offtake environment into a network of markets, and you'll see the red dots there, and they all operate under a single set of rules, and also under a single business model. So a grower, regardless of his size of sophistication, can access a low cost and low risk market environment by just taking logistical risk and a certain amount of price risk. These markets are transparent. It's a public good in South Africa, and the information that is generated from all these markets are distributed back to the stakeholders for free. So you can imagine the power that gives a grower anywhere in South Africa that needs to look at prices across 20,000 odd unique sales units, and what power that provides for a grower as far and de-risking that does for a grower when he does want to market his product. So the outcome of the South African experience is also lesson from it. It's also that you can't copy and paste it. Although we've had in South Africa an extremely fortunate environment where this network has played a direct role in stimulating the horticultural sector, we can't just copy and paste this into another development context. And that became clear for me personally with projects that we ventured out. At face level, it looks easy, but it's not. By trying to take this model up north, and that's the work that I've been working on the last 3 years. That's my research field. Is how do we structure that roadmap of taking this concept that has proven itself to, at scale, open a low-cost, low-risk environment for growers and take that into a development context? Because I believe that's the missing link in creating scalability in other countries. But it's obviously a big hairy problem, as you saw from the iceberg. There are a lot of moving parts in this journey, and you have to understand this problem from various angles. So for me to illustrate this, I'm going to follow the following approach. I'm going to give you a little sense of research I did around the informal trade in South Africa, and make you a little bit think about the end customer and his environment. Although this is from South Africa, and the sample that was used is from South Africa, there's very clear links between what's here, what's found in this research study, and then compare it to my experience in the other countries that we are busy with. The second case will be around the implementation of these projects and our experience around that. And then I'll conclude with some findings. So let me start first of all with the informal sector example. So what became an anomaly in our discussion about food and food security is typically that even in South Africa, we've got this massive production base. I mean, we're talking millions of tons. I mean, through the markets, these markets that I just described, our system handles 3.5 million tons of product every year. That's everything from a tomato to a potato, all the main line items. There's 250 line items that gets transacted through that across 25,000 growers, across 100,000 buyers. So it's a significant amount of product that's being pushed through the system. But even with that healthy, we find an anomaly as far as food security is concerned, specifically in our informal and poorer areas. And that became clear very quickly when we analyzed our informal settlements. And there are a host of reasons for that that I'll get to just now. We also identified the need for the informal sector as being a driver for the provision of product. And we can see it in other African countries. Not only is the informal of SMME environment responsible for the growing of product, and to a larger extent responsible for the growing of product in African countries, but also on the distribution side, we've got a extremely fragmented, but I would say a very vibrant informal sector. But the structural nature of, if we want to address food security into the future, is we're going to have to think differently about this problem, because the product is not getting from the aggregation point into these areas, and that became clear. So on the offtake side, when we look at agricultural production and we look at these agricultural products, you know, the thinking of the informal sector and also on the end result, the consumption side, is an important missing link in our development of these models, and hence the lack of micronutrient diversity amongst consumers, that we find that there is malnourishment and hunger even in this very efficient system. So there's an anomaly here, and that anomaly we also find across Africa. And why is this important to resolve? Because I think that's part of our linking the value chain into these areas. The research study was based on about a sample of 50,000 informal trading areas, sectors across the Gauteng province, here around Johannesburg, for those who don't know the area, Johannesburg, Pretoria area. And interesting, the services and retail is typically what we find is the very active areas, and that is the distribution, and under retail and services is the distribution of food into the cities. Agro processing, we find is a small portion of the informal sector, or within these townships, and the theme of this, the friction between the commercially highly competitive value chains that we see and the small scale informal sectors became apparent also very early. So, and we see that in all the countries. We've got one-dimensional, highly sophisticated formal retail value chains, but in parallel to that, you've got this informal component. And in South Africa, to use South Africa as an example, in South Africa, we've solved the problem of creating, from a grower perspective, an aggregation point that forms part of this informal sector. Although not enough, but we've managed to do that. So a grower in South Africa has got the ability to market both to a formal retail, serve an export market, but also to have a diversified offtake environment where you can also sell through formalized aggregation points to people. And the empowerment of that is that growers then organically start to grow as part of it. What the pandemic, the last year and a half has taught us is that we're highly dependent on our informal value chains for food security, and that is not just a technological problem. I think early on it became important, very important in South Africa to look at the informal trade. Now, in South Africa's case, even with the pandemic, there were a 2-week period where we've had a very low. You could see it in the sales figures, a very low. We had a disruption and low volumes, but that recovered. And throughout the pandemic, we've seen the stable flow of product into the cities because of the informal sector, and that played a vital role in this discussion around food security. So again, you can see the anomaly. We've got product available; it does flow into our cities, but I think that's not enough. We have to look at the last mile into our township environments in order to enhance and improve the food security. The informal environment typically found that functions outside of the legal institutional regulatory environment. I think that's why the regulatory environment is such a blunt object to try and regulate the industry, and it takes specific focus. I think the Zambia project highlighted that when you look at the value chain, you have to be focused on understanding the informal sector, and then also adding the value in the informal sector. The whole issue about payments, digital payments, the reason why there's no offtake for that is, and that's what we found here, is people like cash, and they do not always want to be visible. And I think that's, again, if we look back at the Iceberg example, those are some of the underlying currents that ultimately affects your effectiveness if you turn to technology and overinvest in technology when there's structural problems. The link to the formal economy, there's no rules as far as this. So it depends on the what we find is it depends on the level of formalization, and so you have the message out of this is that each situation is different. It's very difficult to create a blueprint for creating these value chains and creating this offtake. It's very difficult to follow one rule set. So there's selective offtake as far as regulatory requirements are concerned. So, and again, it's done on a case-by-case basis, on a day-by-day basis. The regulatory environments, regulatory measures that are to the benefit of the grower, of the informal sector are adhered to, and those that are not are abandoned. Right. That leads me to the whole market failure discussion. In South Africa, we've got see the market failure for the informal sector, specifically on the consumption side, the wholesale system, where there is exploitation. We all know that the consolidation of power, the power asymmetries, the information asymmetries, that creates an environment that's not transparent. So market failure as far as product is concerned, both on the supply and the demand side. We have a wholesale system where transparency plays a key role in getting the product moving, and that's in South Africa, as I indicated to you, as part of the market system. the issue of transparency was addressed by through regulation to ensure that the offtake point is transparent to the grower. When we talk about our commission system in South Africa, obviously there are problems with our commission system. There are a whole host of them. It's typically a industry that's in flux, where a large scale of consolidation happens. And again, it's typically what you'll find in every country. There's a consolidation of power where the majority of product goes through a small amount of players, and the small guy typically gets pushed out. And that is where, if you don't control the value chain, you haven't got an opportunity to correct these type of asymmetries. And in South Africa's case, although South Africa has not been very effective with it, the tool is there to create small-scale new entrants into the SMME sector. And that typically involves creating the conducive environment for them to trade. Because you've got aggregation, I think that's the lesson. Because you've got product aggregation, it allows for easier entry point into the value chain. But if you've got a fragmented environment, the SMME's role and your ability to offer and pull them into the value chain is hampered by that. So there's always this tension between bulk, let's call it bulk buying, if you like, and in South Africa, as you know, there's always this friction surrounding the bulk networks that undercuts the small scale guy, and that is one of the drivers for the conflict that we see within our informal settlements. Typically, your small scale seller, your hawker, your street seller, there's lack of infrastructure. They perform on very low margins, and there's a small variety. What I want to emphasize is that the informal sector doesn't mean it's not sophisticated. The informal sector is highly sophisticated. The norms that's developed in the informal sector is highly sophisticated. If you think the amount of product that keeps on flowing through these informal structures without any visible contracts, they are very specific, and that's what makes it tricky to deal with the informal sector and to get the buyer base off the ground, because it's not visible. And you have to dig deep to go and find that, and we definitely experienced that when we did the business case in Zambia surrounding the market there, is that there's low visibility at face value, but you have to go and find the underlying drivers of what drives this value chain. And remember, the value chain, I'm talking on the offtake side, not on the input factor side. Formal retail plays a very important role, but formal retail is formal retail. Like I mentioned before, they want economies of scale, they want certification, they create power bases. But to give you an idea, and just to link this up with the regional trade issue and with the failures within the developing countries, that a truck of product will leave Gauteng, Johannesburg, and drive all the way up to the ShopRite in Lusaka, and sell there the product all the way from South Africa. But because the local production doesn't speak to the retailer, they get excluded. So there's a reason why we don't see this offtake as far as our development agriculture is concerned, and I'll get to that also a bit later. And it's because of this friction between the formal retail and the development mandate. And this is for interest sake, I've added this for you, so you can see this is a breakdown of our typical informal sector. And when we talk food, you can see that the distribution of food in townships are informal. And it's base level value addition that happens, but there's a huge emphasis on services. So if we want to stimulate product into our informal settlements, there's already food flowing, and we need to find ways of enhancing and strengthening that flow of product. But it definitely lies in as you can see, in street vendor and on short cycle delivery of services within the township environment. That concludes case one. Just to illustrate the informal settlement environment on the offtake side. The second case, I want to elaborate a bit on the roadmap as far as the market development is concerned. And the issues I want to raise here is that your mandate, there's a friction between the mandates, between a public mandate and a private mandate, and where that comes in, and that's part of the, if you hear the private sector investment, these people, these entities, these stakeholders look at problems differently. On the one hand, you've got a public facing problem that we want to solve social issues, but the private business obviously is looking at it from a commercial point alone, and these two things are in friction. And in South Africa, the market concept has shown how do you blend those two and make it commercially viable, because the markets in South Africa are commercially viable, and they managed to get that public-private relationship right, and that's something to take note of. The other aspect that I cannot highlight enough is alignment. So if you get involved and if you're creating value chains, you have to make sure that there's an alignment of your interests, and that is the public, the private, and the political. Those triple Ps, you need to align that. If you're not making sure you tick the boxes around the needs of a private investor, and you don't have alignment with his objectives, his or her objectives, with that of the public mandate that you're dealing with food, you're going to get problems. And that's the journey that we've walked in Zambia. It's the journey we're currently walking in Lesotho, and these things have been tested there. And it is possible to create a environment where you do serve the public interest, but you also serve the private interest, and that's the exciting thing about the work that we are doing. Then of course you have to take responsibility for alignment for the flow of value, and with flow of value I don't just mean money, I mean service value. That is from the production, from the farm side, all the way through to your offtake, but then also not just on the horizontal but also on the vertical. How do you create the competition that pulls product into the value chain, and then ultimately protect, and with that in parallel protect the interest of the grower. Some of this will not be new to you, and I'm just going to run through them. It's just a summary, and some of this will speak to your experience, I'm sure. But obviously we face poor planning from inception to completion. So it's important to pull projects through from where you start with the product all the way until you sell the product. And that's not always in the domain of the stakeholders that are involved. There's a bias. So if you're interested in selling tractors, if you're interested in selling fertilizer, if your interest lies in selling other input factors, then obviously you're going to have a bias towards looking at the grower from that perspective. On the other hand, when you're a commercial entity that needs product from this diversified supply base, you can see where the friction comes in. I don't have the product, the quality isn't there, the standards isn't there. So there has to be planning as far as that is concerned. Management and contract skills. This unfortunately, it has to work commercially, and with that you have to have the contract. And I'm sure with your experience at AFA, with the previous speaker, was around finance. That's typically the type of problems you need to solve to make the wheels turn. Obviously, we've got a history of poor project delivery. We 100% encounter the silo mentality right from the beginning, which is a natural outcome of having a diverse group of stakeholders working together on solving a problem. You've got unstructured planning and project rollout, poor project compliance, and those are around the project physical implementation side of things, and a poor understanding of supply and demand dynamics, because typically these projects, the market development projects, are infrastructure based, but once you're done, there's a building left, and there's no processes that flow through it, and you don't have the product flow. And I mean, there's so many examples across Africa and in South Africa of where beautiful projects being delivered, the building is standing, but there's no throughput, and then obviously the political needs versus the public needs. I'm going to skip this slide. I'm just illustrating for you typically the aggregation that needs to be involved. Logistics play a massive role in enabling this, and then from the demand side, the deliberate consolidation of demand into a market environment. So if you're going to create markets, you have to speak to two different sets of stakeholders. You have to speak to your grower. You have to look at how do I incubate him through this. You have to incubate your aggregation point, and you have to ensure that you speak to the needs of your offtake. Important point is it's all about process. You'll see I don't talk a lot of technology because it's not really a technological problem. It's a process problem. So moving from formal, informal, last couple of points on this case. Standards, we may make a lot about standards, but in our experience, the standards also kick the small guy out. And if we look at the informal sector, standards does not have to be the same as it is in retail, right? There's a specific set of standards in South Africa where product is sold, and there's a move towards create a baseline, and I think that's the right approach. Create a baseline, basic quality standards, basic grading, etc. And then you've got a set of standards that serves the needs of the customer. It does not have to be retail standards for the product to flow through. If growers want to stay small, not all growers want to be big growers, that's okay. But the issue is not about size, it's about sustainability. So even the challenge is still how do we create sustainability for a small grower, and that's what South Africa shows, is that market development can create that conduit for that. I mentioned the end-to-end planning, that it's not just about the building, and importantly, you have to create a service basket around the grower, and around your buyer, and around the people that does the broader offtake environment. You have to create a service basket. You have to be service focused. We're very much product physical infrastructure focused, but there's a service around that, and that includes financial services, but it also includes the typical convenience, etc. And those are important issues regardless of where you are. And as I said, people, process, and politics. SEZs clearly are not working on its own because of the disconnect between infrastructure provision and then large-scale infrastructure provision, and not paying attention to looking at the offtake environment. This slide will give you just an idea of the high-level points of working within a development context. Obviously, you have to look at the transformative elements, the inclusivity of it, the scalability and sustainability, and the catalytic impact that you want to achieve. Now, this looks like academic terms, but as I said, that's the work that we've been doing, and then the intention was to deliberately put some meat around these elements in order to show a roadmap of how do we do that. I'm going to conclude with the final slide, just to map back the findings. So we looked at these smallholder supply chains, how to make the food chain more sustainable, and hopefully I've given you a couple of thoughts around that, some pointers. It's obviously a big subject that we probably will not end, that you can't cover in a 30-minute slot. But I mentioned alignment. Alignment, absolutely essential. If you run a project and you don't pay attention to alignment of the public, private, political, and commercial goals, you are setting yourself up for failure. That is difficult, It also involves a fair amount of diplomacy, but you have to ensure that you've got alignment. Otherwise, it kicks you out. There's this industrial dualism, as I said, between the formal and the informal sector, and hopefully I've illustrated you some of the dynamics around that we have to take cognizance of. Public, private, and then community. I can't stress this enough. Remember, we're all part of a village, and we have to look at the linkages around the community. Because ultimately, what we find in the informal sector, most of the funding comes from family structures and networks. It does not come from the formal finance environment. So it's people close around those entrepreneurs that fund them. Ultimately, it is about the customer. And by the customer, I mean, in this case, it's about the end consumer. And we have to look at the end consumer. We focus very much on the production primary side, but we have to say that that product needs to flow to somebody that sees value in it, whatever that customer defines as value. But we need to pay attention, and that's what retail teaches us. You have to look after your customer, and we need to learn that in the informal sector as well. It's a low visibility environment. It's not necessarily a problem, but we have to take cognizance of that. And through vetting, you reduce risk. And I think you've heard it in the speaker's presentation. You can read it into there. Vetting is important on all sectors, and by doing that, you reduce risk. So build vetting into your process. Then we have to look at the full project value chain. We typically engage with projects and clients on any point in this value chain, from concept development, pre-feasibility, feasibility, bankability, the funding, the operational component, and the post-operations. And I'll just mention post-operations because typically once we've implemented, we walk away, and that's the most critical time, is that year, 12 months, 18 months after the operation, where the project typically fails if it doesn't have the specialized skills around it. So what's new? What are we bringing to the table? What have we done? We've looked at the input source manufacturing and service models, and hopefully I've given you some insight into that. And in order to achieve this, part of the solution is to build a multidisciplinary team, which we have tested and is showing great potential to make some sort of a contribution towards this problem, which I do believe is an area that is not well serviced. And I think so far I can report that we are getting traction in that area. So hopefully in the future we can stand back and say we made a difference as far as the offtake environment is concerned. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity, and I hand back to the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Range, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions that I'd also like to ask, just to frame the discussion going forward. But I see in the comments that there are quite a few questions as well coming from some of the participants. And so one question from Clyde Graham is asking if Pharma Co-op play a role in solving some of the key issues that you identified, and how would the Pharma Co-op become a tool for resolving some of these challenges?
Okay, just in short, very important. The co-op model is a proven model of how do we aggregate power. Remember, I said power asymmetries. Now, if growers don't work together, then they lose power. And in South Africa, the markets, and what I did not mention in the beginning, it was deliberately focused on creating a power, aggregated power for the grower, because his risk lies 500 kilometers away at the market. He's not there. As a small guy, he can't on his own, he doesn't have the economies of scale to be in two places at one time. So you need somebody to look after the interest. And a co-op is critical for creating that. Over and above that, it ticks the boxes. And remember, it's a backhaul. It's on the one side, you've got product going out, and the other side, you've got input factors coming back. And the co-op is a very important coordination tool for obviously the management of a co-op. As you might have experienced, is a political, most cases political environment. If you get it right, the co-op plays a vital role in getting this right as far as the, let's call it, the first mile is concerned, from production to co-op, but then from co-op into the broader value chain. That's where the additional linkages are required for the co-op model to really have impact.
All right, thank you. So there's another question from Killian Banda, and his question is: quality standards remain a huge barrier to smallholder farmers in participating in structured markets like what you described. How does Freshmark deal with this situation? And again, he's talking about supermarket revolutions, where you find products from South Africa being sold in like supermarkets in Zambia. So his question is: what is Freshmark doing to enhance local capacities?
Right. So as far as quality control is concerned, you've got obviously different segments of growers. You always have your sophisticated growers that can give you a pallet out of his pack house with the right certification, etc. My point is that on the small scale grower side, you do not have the luxury, they do not have the facilities to reach that high level of sophistication. What you do need to do, and in South Africa, we've developed the local gap concept specifically for this reason. So you've got the typical global gap for export. What we said, we see that the small scale grower is being pushed out of retail because it's not that the product isn't suitable, it doesn't conform to a quality standard. So we have to structure it's not a lower standard, but it's a standard focused on the local dynamics of that specific country and the specific needs. So one has to move away from the idea that an international standard has to be complied with in a development context for that product to be okay. It is not so. The product is perfectly consumable. You need to look at basic things around washing. You need to look at basic things around traceability, obviously. But those issues are potentially not exclusionary. It doesn't need to add a lot of cost, and that's why to answer the question, you need to look at a certification standard that speaks to local and speaks to the informal sector, where you don't need to conform to the same standard as you typically want to for export or for the formalized value chain.
Thank you. There's another question from Simila, and he or she is saying that from your experience, is there any value in trying to formalize the informal sector? And he's asking that from a financier's perspective, it's difficult to finance them because, to your point, it's difficult to get information about the sector, especially among other factors.
Yeah, so the informal sector is fragmented, and as you know, that there's the transaction cost of getting a fragmented environment consolidated is huge. That's typically why these projects don't work on both sides. All these initiatives about financing the SMME sector, they're extremely fragmented. So in order to get that right, you need to get your aggregation point right, because the moment you sit on a aggregation point where there are multiple farmers coming to that point, consuming services, and also buyers coming to that point, you've obviously got a leverage and an entry point that creates low cost provision of services. So the specifically finance, but you can't do that unless you've got a structured environment that's traceable, etc. And that's the catch-22 that we sit with, is that if you don't get that aggregation point right, you don't get the buy-in, the organic buy-in from both those sectors. And that's what we, as far as the Lusaka project is concerned, I think we're well on track there to create that aggregation point that will allow low-cost access for people servicing a broad variety of services, as I said, a broad variety of a broad service basket. But with that, you get the buy. There's no easy answer for that. You have to create the aggregation point. And my view is that if you create that aggregation point around the flow of product, your opportunity is there to then offer services then to all these other stakeholders and role players.
All right, thank you. So I just wanted to ask a question about your experiences in terms of duplication in the various country-focused interventions, and then also what can be done to align stakeholders, because as much as possible we want to encourage partnerships, but then as we have lots of people or lots of different entities are doing different things within these countries and in implementing different strategies, how do we, in your experience, find a common ground where we bring people together to be able to have a maximized impact?
Okay. The duplication problem is massive. Wherever we go, we find that you've got multiple organizations all circling and trying to solve the same problems. It's money from the EU, it's money from America, it's money from all over, and institutions from all over are trying to solve the same problem. So you end up with this horrible situation where you've got an irrigation scheme being funded by a big fund. They're pumping millions into that, and right next to down the road there's another project that's being funded, but none of them have put the dots together to get the market going for their product, and each one of them are trying to do that in order to create their own little value chain. So duplication in the system is massive, and one needs to reach out to other people, and that goes to your second point. I think I can't stress it enough, one needs to get ideological alignment. And by that, if we say we're in a development environment, then we're in a development environment, and we've got a very specific goal, a very specific target, and a very specific outcome that we need to reach, and that is impact on the ground. And if you align the right stakeholders with that one goal, then you get traction. And that was my experience so far. At the moment we have this type of discussion with a client that's also interested in creating that goal, things become easy, because now you can solve problems together. But to get to that point, I think it's critical, to answer your second question, is to get that alignment right. And that, like I said to you, that involves some hard questions and some real honesty about what you are doing. The commercials around it, and not to make the commercials any less important, one has to tick the commercial box. But if without alignment, like you can see across Africa, without the alignment, you get exploitation. You immediately get that exploitative nature that kicks the small guy out and then consolidates power and then leads to a market failure.
Thank you very much for your time and then for speaking with us. I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists to also share their thoughts about the issue of alignment and the issue of building synergy. Dr. Munir and Joseph, do you have any input into especially financing and also information?
I think from my side is going back to the iceberg. It's really, all these initiatives are a must, and Dr. Range has mentioned some very, very interesting points around the need. I mean, the formal, the informal, all these elements. But focusing on these only will only solve it to a certain degree and not to its potential. And I think we're way behind where we need to be, and therefore needs. And it's really difficult because it needs a multi-sections, multi-organizations, multi-governments to really create something. I mean, that doesn't. Well, I'm not talking about the whole Africa, but for country by country. But it needs different actors from different public sector and private to be looking at different angles and create some, not necessarily task force, because I don't think these things sometimes lead to anything concrete, but an effective ecosystem that will drive the agri sector forward.
All right. Hi, Joseph. Do you have any thoughts, especially in terms of the financing bit, how we can be able to pull together synergy or build synergy to ensure that we have a more coordinated effort to be able to address the issue of financing? Thank you,
Nana, and thank you for the presentations that have been made. I think I would like to pick the word that Dr. Munir has used, and that is ecosystems. I think in these relationships, in these investments, and that's where AVAP strength comes in, where AVAP is influencing the establishment of ecosystems that are driven by private sector motivation, that brings together key players that have common interests that can be served by working together for purposes of increasing productivity, improving efficiency, and addressing food security, while at the same time pursuing efficient creation of wealth. So aligning the players, the financial service providers, the suppliers, the producers, it's an ecosystem that, if it worked efficiently and well, of course, there are power dynamics in between that have to be managed and balanced. But at the same time, working together makes all the difference. Thanks.
Thank you. I like that you mentioned about the power dynamics, because obviously as an agripreneur or an entrepreneur coming into the agriculture sector, you need to be able to balance the interest of both the private sector and the public sector, and also looking at the development agencies and their interest. In your experience, that's my last question to all of you. How do you balance, or how do you create a situation where you're able to address most of these interests without also impacting on your businesses, and then also ensure that you have business growth and ensure that the farmer's interest at the end of the day is secured?
Can I give sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, all I can add about around that is that you have to, like the AFAP model has shown, it is a difficult journey, and you have to have a broad view on it. And if you don't, what I've learned from what AFAP is doing is that you have to solve the underlying commercial challenges and finance challenges, which is a very important part of solving this problem. And without that, you don't have the movement of. Without money, you don't have the movement of product, and I think they go hand in hand.
I think what I would say to that question in terms of the power dynamics and how do you balance the different interests, there are many different attempts that are made. Some of them assume promotion of equity and not necessarily efficiency. Others basically promote proactive sort of activities to enhance one party against the other. These power dynamics really are determine the share of the market price at the end of the day. Whoever has the information as has been presented will have a bigger share or ability to manipulate or even use the market to advantage. So at the end of the day, it is the power dynamics really ends up are demonstrated by the share of the market price at the end of the day. The way to address these power dynamics is promotion of competition. The more agri-SMEs that are in the area pursuing efficient approaches and the best surviving, those that are efficient surviving, those that are professional and ethical surviving, at the end of the day, competition has a big impact or effect in balancing that power dynamics. The second is use of technologies, use of information to increase efficiency. A case in point is when Uber comes to the scene and the costs drop significantly, you have an efficient operation that can improve the ultimate share of the overall cake. And finally is the aspect of in those areas where players are disadvantaged, where investment may not be the option to go, but support, public sector support, lifting the disadvantage to the point that they can compete, they can engage in business operations. plays a key role in trying to balance those power dynamics. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Munir, do you want to give it a go?
Yes. So actually, the question of how to balance own interest and the development, if I understood it correctly, I think it would be very, very hard to answer, because that will depend on each and every situation and an actor and who's involved. However, I mean, really the message I would maybe use the opportunity to deliver it is, all these agri SMEs, they have huge future and potential in front of them, and an opportunity. And America is not the land of opportunity anymore. I mean, it's Africa for sure, but it can only become the land of opportunity if its own different sectors and different companies and so on. So all these agri-SMEs really try and push and challenge where we are today. I mean, from our side and all other organizations that are bringing information like AFAP, AFRICOM, and so on, we can make it available, and we try to also arrange in a different, so it's not one shoe fits for all. So we will have different products for different sort of sizes and to fit the where the actor fits in the supply chain. But of course, that's the best we can do, and we'll make it available, and its pricing will not be as its bigger sort of sister tool that will be offered to the global actors. But you know, one hand doesn't applaud. You need the other side, actually is the African sector, also to jump in. And the other message is to all the governments. I know we have a few attending, and AFAP's relation and so on. There is so much more the governments can do to really, because to me is really the African green agriculture is a car that is stalling and then restarting, and then we're trying to look at the spark plugs, and then sometimes we're looking at the battery, and then we're looking at the clutch. But maybe you know you have to look at all these together, going back to the iceberg. So what governments can really do, and that's where they are really involved, and particularly in West Africa as a key area, they really should, and that's each government can have an exit strategy, just like a business plan of any startup. I mean, you come in, you boost your sector, you kickstart it, you are the catalyst, but you have to have an exit strategy so that your market will flourish and grow. And Kenya, unfortunately, I don't have the example here because I was not planning to really dig deeper into the different subject. But in Kenya, you can see the market was really strong with great subsidies, with different sectors involved, like the different, as in government bodies, like the cereals board, the KCDA, and so on. But more and more, and we see all these government bodies being removed, and the market more and more privatized, and is growing. And that for sure will open up more and more opportunities for small SMEs to jump into that sector and then slowly grow. That maybe happened naturally. Governments in the West can really learn from that business case and sort of, as I mentioned, have an exit strategy when you start with first year, 2 years, whatever number of years, and advisably to be short, a small number rather than big number of subsidies. Then you move into a smarter subsidies, then you move into a lower percentage as the time you're seeing the private sector growing. And that's the most beautiful sort of image one can have for a market that is subsidized but can suffer the examples I've shown you. So that's the kind of message maybe I would like to deliver.
All right, thank you very much for making time to be with us here today. All too soon, we've come to an end of this session. Just to summarize pretty much the three presentations, if you look at the first presentation, looking at SME financing, pretty much summarizing or trying to highlight the issue of having to have a comprehensive financial plan, understanding the sector that you are entering into, and then also critically outlining some of the risk factors, and then coming up with a robust way of addressing these risks or mitigating some of these risks, as well as identifying who the key players within the financial institutions are, and then also taking advantage of the already existing funding opportunities. Dr. Munir's presentation also highlights the importance of market information, and I think one of the biggest words that, or his last phrase that I would like to leave behind is that if, we always say knowledge is power, but then we also have to know that information and knowledge cannot be power if you do not know how to use it, or if you have it in excess and you don't know what to do with it. You need to be able to use the information that you have at your available to be able to make critical decisions that would support the growth of your business as an SME. And then if we look at the final presentation by Dr. Range, he also talked about supply chain and how we need to be able to identify and clearly understand the supply chain values within the key countries that we are operating, or the key areas, and be able to take advantage of some of the already existing platforms and already existing opportunities. But then he also did mention the fact that there needs to be a lot of collaboration and a lot of building of synergy within all the key players to be able to have the maximized impact. On that note, I'd like to hand over to Jason Scarpone, who is the CEO and president of AFAB, to pretty much bring the session to a close.
Oh, thanks, Nana, and thanks to our panelists and attendees and everybody. A very good session today. I realize we're out of time, so I just would like to share one final thought, maybe leading into future meetings that we have. At the beginning, Joseph mentioned the exponential growth in SMEs. You know, by hundreds and hundreds of percent, we've seen a growth over the last decade in SMEs. That level of commercialization is virtually unrivaled in Africa. I would say maybe in telecommunications, we've seen the same level of commercialization in the last, in recent years. If you look globally, the only thing that comes close to comparing is probably the collapse of the Soviet Union, when all the state and collective farms commercialized and we saw an explosion of small and medium enterprises. So what we're dealing with today is really historic. And in that context, it's not surprising that financing, marketing, and underlying market information systems have lagged a bit behind. In other words, the entrepreneurism, the growth of these small, medium enterprises has outpaced the services designed to facilitate their growth and development. What we heard today from Joseph, Justi, and Munir are three examples of where we're catching up. It's three examples of where financing, we're looking at trade finance to serve those SMEs. We're looking at ways to better facilitate their procurement and distribution, sales of product, which is the creative new ways of aligning markets and working with smallholder trade and the businesses and aggregation points around that offtake, that procurement. And with Munir, new ways of digging deeper. I mean, it may even be most striking, Munir, if we were to turn back the clock and look at the market information you were collecting, you know, just 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, it would be fundamentally different. What satisfied a market 5, 10 years ago, what satisfied your clients 5, 10 years ago, probably is not the same as what would satisfy them today, just because of all these new entrants into the marketplace, this deepening of the value chain, this diversification of distribution systems and alternatives. You know, it's hard for us to think in terms of just showing import data and global pricing and saying, okay, we've done our job on market information. We now have to go deeper, and in many ways we're catching up to this runaway growth in small and medium enterprise development. I think it's a fascinating, exciting time. I applaud the presenters for the great strides they've made in chasing this opportunity. So with that, again, I thank them. I think it's serves as great role models. And I look forward to our next SME convening. Thank you, Nana, for pulling this all together.
Thank you very much, Jason. We'd also like to, on this note, end this presentation or this webinar session. We will welcome through our emails and new topics that you would like for us to look at in the upcoming webinar series. We welcome new SMEs that would also like to highlight or share some of their experiences with this platform. And thank you. We look forward to the next session. Do have a lovely evening.